Good morning, ladies and gentlemen, and thanks for the introduction, Tom. As Tom indicated, I'm going to give you some information on what activity is being experienced across all sectors and regions. Some of this activity is being experienced to a greater extent in some areas than others. But it's important to note that based on the information and some of the stats or percentages you'll see are quite high, they are coming off a low base following the recession. But the one thing we have seen since the end of 2014 is a consistent growth in planning activity. So to give you a brief overview for the Republic of Ireland of the current activity and future pipeline, you'll see that the value of all construction projects which went on site in the first quarter of 2016 was 2.1 billion. This represents an overall increase of 20% on the comparable figure for 2015. The number of major projects on site has also risen from 431 to 597 in the same period. That's an increase of some 38%. All regions are showing growth year on year, apart, I'm sorry to say, from Connacht. This can be explained in terms of the Gorta Tuam PPP road scheme, which started in 2005. However, if we omit this scheme from the data, the underlying trend is somewhat positive. Equally so, Leinster, there will be no surprises, the largest share of the market into the first quarter of 2016 with a value of almost 1 billion. Which is mainly due to, again, two major road projects which began in Wexford. In terms of future pipeline activity overall for the sector, the values of plans granted in the first quarter increased by 58% from 2015. All regions experienced a significant uplift, as you will see in the accompanying graph, with a total value of plans granted of over 2 billion. Dublin has 1 billion worth of projects plans granted, which represents a 48% of the market. Major projects, for example, would be the Boland's Quay development, which has just commenced, examples of the extension for the Frascati shopping centre in Blackrock in Dublin, and other major projects of note are the Centre Parks Holiday Resort in Longford, which I should note is subject to appeal presently, and the Microsoft Data Centre in Dublin, which was covered earlier by Mary Buckley of the IDA. Looking at what's coming into the pipeline, there's a 44% increase in plans submitted in the first quarter when compared to the similar period in 2015, with the largest number of planning applications in Munster at 671, closely followed obviously by Leinster and then Dublin. Major projects submitted for planning include the Liffey Valley Shopping Centre and the Curragh Racecourse redevelopment. Now, as we're all aware, there are significant challenges being faced by the various sectors within the industry, and the issues surrounding the residential sector are certainly well documented and were certainly addressed by the Minister this morning. It was welcome news from everybody's perspective that government is establishing a 2 million fund, with the Exchequer providing 150 million and a low-interest loan of 50 million to assist local authorities in the provision of local infrastructure, which hopefully in turn will reduce the cost of housing to prospective purchasers, but also, as the Minister outlined himself this morning, will encourage developers to engage and get active on the ground now that these roadblocks have been removed. This, coupled with what I had originally as a 2.2 billion, but the Minister corrected me this morning and said it's actually 3.2 billion in social housing over the next 3 years, should see the commencement of an increase in the number of residential units coming available. In terms of on-site activity in the residential sector, only 2,050 units started on site in the first quarter. And surprisingly, to note that that is an increase of 72% on the same period last year and 25% on the 2014. And it should be noted that currently only projects of 50 units and over will be completed on a phased basis. Continuing issues in the sector include funding of the projects, profitability for developers, building regulations, and the lack of infrastructure, including roads and water, which again, hopefully, this 200 million fund announced yesterday will address. It is no surprise that Dublin continues to outperform all other regions, with a growth rate of 170% when compared to the similar period last year. However, Leinster, Ulster being the border counties, and Connacht have fallen slightly, but Munster has shown a significant growth of 150% in the same period, albeit also from a low base. In terms of the future pipeline, the number of units granted planning permission in the first quarter is 3,900, which represents an increase of 60% when again compared to the similar period last year. And our estimated value on these projects is about 530 million. Dublin accounts for 360 million of this, with projects granted planning permission in this period. We were also seeing an increase in projects in both the border counties and Connacht, and for Connacht in particular, 20 million in projects, housing projects were granted in the first quarter. Looking at the industrial sector, the overall picture for the industrial sector is reasonably healthy. There is an over 500% increase in value of industrial projects on site in the first quarter. And this is explained by the number of data centres which have gone on site. Again, this matter was addressed by Mary Buckley of the IDA this morning, and it's hugely encouraging to see the number of data centres coming to Ireland. Most of the project value in Leinster is related to in fact, one data centre in Meath, which we estimate the shell and core to be about approximately 90 million euros. There are also 3 data centres coming into Dublin, which will make up the bulk of the growth for this region. However, if we strip out the data centres from these figures, we see a more modest growth, but yet it comes in at 200%. Clearly, the regional breakdown favours Leinster and Dublin due to these factors. In terms of the future pipeline, based on plans granted, our research is pointing towards a 46% increase at plans granted in the first quarter versus 2015. When we look at civil and the utility sector, the challenges facing the sector were recently highlighted by the Construction Industry Federation. They had actually commissioned ourselves to provide analysis of the current status of projects in the system. And our research showed how capital investment had been ravaged by the recession, and projects from national infrastructure like Dublin Airport to waterworks and roadwork improvements had been delayed by up to 4 years. This, obviously, as the CIF themselves had pointed out, needs to be addressed urgently. However, our data on the value of projects going to site in the first quarter of this year has increased from 680 million to over 1 billion. And this increase is directly attributed to 2 large-scale projects in Leinster, which is the M11 in Gorey to Enniscorthy road scheme and the N25 New Ross bypass. In terms of future pipeline, a lot is dependent on government confidence in the economic recovery to see the acceleration of large-scale projects being given the green light over the next number of years. However, this confidence is not directly reflected in the plans granted for the first quarter, where only 5 million worth of civil and utility projects were granted planning permission. Looking at medical and care residential, the first quarter saw a modest increase of 20% in projects going on site when compared to a similar period last year. However, it should be noted this is actually 29% lower than 2014. In terms of future pipeline, the value of projects being granted planning permission in the first quarter has actually fallen by 48%. The figures in Q1 of 2015 included projects like the 64 million Bon Secure Hospital in Cork and the 40 million spent on the National Rehabilitation Hospital in Dunleary's refurbishment, along with a number of primary care centres. However, it is worth noting from the previous speaker that the 750 million National Children's Hospital has just been granted planning permission by Bord Pleanála in the second quarter of this year. So we look forward to seeing that come on site. The commercial and retail sector activity has been continuing at some pace, driven, as Mary outlined again this morning, by foreign direct investment and demand for Grade A offices. However, our research shows that while the number of projects commencing on site is lower than 2015, there is a substantial number of projects being granted planning permission. We have also observed a capacity concern for Tier 1 contractors and the ability to deliver these high-value, fast-track €100 million plus developments, following the demise of many top contracting companies. And it is hopeful that this lack of capacity won't delay these projects too long. The value of projects going on site decreased by 10% in the first quarter when compared to the previous year. However, when we look at the underlying trend and we exclude, for example, like the Bank of Ireland headquarters redevelopment, which commenced in quarter one of 2015, which we estimated to be about 100 million, the sector is experiencing some modest growth. Looking at the future pipeline, over 430 million in projects have been granted planning permission in the first quarter, and this represents a 40% increase on the same period of last year. However, much of the activity is still Dublin-based, but we do expect this to change in the coming years. Education is proving somewhat challenging. CIS estimates that over 140 million of projects have gone on site in the first quarter. And while this represents a 36% of the same period last year, I would note that one major project in Dublin is responsible for the majority of this, which is the Trinity Business School. And the regional breakdown shows disparity in regions, with Dublin representing 75% of the sector. The prospects, as I said, are not positive, with a 27% decrease in plans granted in the first quarter of this year when compared to 2015. Looking at the hotel and catering sector, we're seeing an equally different picture. The sector is returning to growth, which is evident by the recent publication of 7,500 hotel bedrooms which will be built over the next 3 years. Our data is showing an 83% increase in the value of projects on site in 2016 when compared to 2015. Much of the sector growth increase can be attributed to large-scale refurbishments like the Mount Juliet and the Adair Manor hotel complexes, which in itself provides evidence of the renewed confidence in this hotel and catering sector. In the broader hotel market, 13 hotels are under construction at the end of March, comprising of 658 bedrooms. Of these, 71% or approximately 464 rooms span in the 5 Dublin projects. Of the total number of rooms under construction, 48% comprise of extensions to existing hotels, 45% in new hotels, and the remaining 7% are in hotel developments. Again, looking at the future pipeline, we have seen increases in plans granted of some 390% when compared to the previous period last year. Fáilte Ireland have predicted Irish tourism will grow by 6% in 2016, after a bumper 2015, when over 8 million foreign tourists visited our shores. Some of the latest projects to be given the green light include 2 developments at Oakmount. Bord Pleanála has granted planning permission to develop a 5-storey boutique hotel in Ranelagh Village in Dublin 6 and a 7-storey 93-bedroom hotel in the North Wall Quay. Looking at the sports and social and leisure sector, the current outlook appears to be on a downward trend. There's a 65% fall in on-site projects in the first quarter compared to the same period last year. The spend for the last 2 years in quarter one has been around 80 million, partly due to the effects of capital sports grants, and this year the value of projects on site is only 30 million for the quarter. In terms of future pipeline, while a figure of 270 million worth of projects have been granted permission, this is mainly made up of one project, which is a 230 million Centre Parks development in Longford, which I referred to earlier on, has been subject to a planning appeal. If we remove this project from the data set, the underlying trend shows a decline in projects being granted planning permission from over 60 million in 2014 to 40 million in 2016. And finally, looking at the agricultural sector, again, value of projects in sight increased by a mere 2% in the quarter to just over 10 million. However, when we look at the commodity markets in stagnation, we expect this sector's loan performance to remain the same as farmers hold off on many large-scale investments until the market improves. So in conclusion, what I'd like to say is that when compiling our data, we focused on the underlying trends for each region and sector, as major projects often skew year-on-year results and give a misleading picture of what is actually happening. However, I am glad to report that the trends are positive in most cases, albeit in some cases marginal. These trends, supported by one of the latest forecasts for 2016, which predicts the construction sector is to grow by a circa 14%. And also, when we look at the latest Ulster Bank PMI index, while recording a decrease down to 55.9%, it should be noted that it remains above 50% for the last 33 months, which I think is hugely positive for the sector. However, in terms of note of caution, however, we can all appreciate our industry still faces many challenges, which will be outlined today. Most immediate being the impact of Brexit on the Irish economy, which is, while unquantifiable, and will be addressed shortly by Michael Dahl from Barber ABI, who will give us a first-hand account from the UK perspective. Nonetheless, it is expected to have a negative impact, creating uncertainty over investment decisions and barriers to doing business in the construction industry. The sector still experiencing difficulties in recruiting professional and trade personnel to meet the growing demand. However, it was encouraging to read the CSO figures recently, where they said that at the end of March, over 131,000 people were employed in the sector, representing a 28% increase over 2 years. Finally, I'd like to say, if you'd like a copy of the statistical information I've covered in the presentation, please feel free to visit us at our stand number 35, and I'll be delighted to give you a copy of the market review. Thank you for listening.